Hello and welcome, and this is Peter Nolan. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to this presentation today. I really appreciate you, so thank you very much for listening to me. The background of this presentation is like this. I was recently on Bill Inman's textual ETL class, and Bill's got something really interesting and valuable on his plate there, so you want to go have a look at it if you can. But I was in the class in the first group of people to be taught how this software works and the thinking behind it. And one of the comments Bill made was, for some reason, structured customer surveys provide very flat data, which doesn't seem to be very useful in textual analytics. Now, Bill didn't posit a reason for why this might be so. He just said it is, in reflection of the work that he's been doing over the last 15 or 18 years. And one of the class participants said, put her hand up virtually in the Zoom meeting, put her hand up and said, well, why would that be? And he says, I don't know. It's just, that's how it appears. And so I sent her a message and saying, if you're genuinely interested, I can explain to you why that is. And she said, well, yeah, I would be interested in understanding why that is. And so we linked up on LinkedIn, and I said, tell you what, I'll make a public video, and I'll publish it, and you can go listen to that. Because if you're interested in answering that question, then other people will be interested in answering that question or hearing the answer to that question. And I might as well do an audio and put it on my website, and then you listen to it and we will go over it. She said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. Because it takes a little while to go over why structured customer surveys are useless. And sure, I could call her and talk to her on Skype and explain it to her. But, I can't record that conversation and publish it because obviously her name and voice would be involved, right? So I suggested to her, I'll make a public video and publish it. You can listen to that, and then we can discuss your questions about that and other things about that afterwards. She said, sure, that sounds like a really good idea. So that's where this came from. And the woman in question is very well experienced. She's older than, I'm 56, she's a little bit older than me, and she's been around the business intelligence area for a long, long time. And if she doesn't understand why structured customer surveys are useless and in many ways dangerous, then chances are most other people don't understand it. And if she has that question, why would this be so? Chances are other people would have the question, why would this be so? She's not like a 25-year-old just starting out, right? She's, don't know her age, but I know when she went to university from a resume. So I don't know her age. Women don't like people talking about their age, but she's very long-term experienced, very knowledgeable, but apparently didn't know why this is the case. So that's the reason for giving this presentation, okay? The background. So if you don't want to know why customer surveys are useless and oftentimes dangerous and counterproductive, then stop. Please hit stop, go away, do whatever it is you want to do with your next half hour or 45 minutes or however long this takes, right? But if you are kind of interested in saying, that's interesting, why are structured customer surveys useless or sometimes dangerous? I wouldn't have thought that was the case. And if you're a company that constantly does customer surveys, then maybe you want to listen to this because very likely you're wasting your money, right? So what I'm going to tell you about in this presentation is I'm going to tell you about why it is that structured customer surveys are mostly useless. Occasionally they can be made to be useful, but they're mostly useless and often dangerous. I'm going to give you the background of why that is. And I'm going to go through things like human psychology, human behavior, the nature of being human, etc., because your structured customer surveys are interactions with human beings who, by being human, exhibit the nature of being human. Whereas getting feedback of discussion out of textual discussion on comment sites is way different to a structured customer survey, which is part of the reason why Bill's textual analytics is really, really interesting to me, because I've known structured customer surveys are useless since the early 90s when we were doing them at IBM. We used to do these at IBM, spend a lot of time and money and effort doing these at IBM. Completely useless, counterproductive, in fact. And I realized that and I went, gee, I wonder why that is. I had an idea, but I wasn't sure. And of course, back in the 90s, customer surveys were all a big thing. As soon as, when we got the web, one of the big things people started doing when we got internet was customer surveys, right? Because it made customer surveys cheap. And today, political parties still do focus groups, which is essentially a customer survey, right? And surveying companies consistently do surveys, and people consistently pay to get surveys done, and it's all pretty much useless. Okay, it's all pretty much useless. So I'll talk to you about the nature of being human, etc., and why that's useless, and then I'll give you the glimmer of hope and tell you what has turned out to be the way to ask people questions that's actually useful. I'll tell you about that, because I came across that about, must be 10 or 12 years ago. There was a book released on this subject, and I tried to do a search before I started this presentation. I tried to do a search on that book. I can't find it. I don't have it anymore, but I couldn't find the book in question, but I'll describe it and maybe someone can find it and put its name in the comments, right? So that's kind of the background. So let's get started. Why are structured customer surveys useless and sometimes outright dangerous? Well, the fundamental reason is you're asking a human being for their feedback in a structured form. That's what a structured customer survey is. That's the fundamental reason why it's useless and bordering on dangerous. Okay? So, Peter, why would that be? I mean, it sounds completely normal. And it is completely normal unless you understand the nature of being human and the nature of human behavior. Now, the nature of being human and the nature of human behavior has been a question for philosophers for pretty much all eternity. You can go back and read Aristotle and Plato and guys like this. These guys, Aristotle, Plato, struggled with the thought of what is the nature of being human, the dichotomy between good and evil, to do good things and to do bad things, and why did this occur? The ancient philosophers struggled with this question, and this question has been struggled with all through humanity. Now, as it happened, when I was at university, when I was a very young trainee, okay, and I mean, I was a trainee. I went to work in my first trainee job when I was 18 as a trainee programmer with BHP in Australia, Australia's largest company, and I was a trainee in their steelworks. And the superintendent for the steelworks IT, a Russian guy called Dmitry, very Russian, had the notion that if his IT people did some philosophy and psychology courses, they might have a better understanding of how the end users tick, how the users of the systems we're building tick, and if they did these classes, they might actually produce better results in software development. Now, in 1982, that was a pretty radical concept, okay? The concept that IT people should study philosophy and psychology and these sort of things to build better computer systems. That was a pretty radical thought. But hey, I was a trainee. To me, the option was really simple. You have to go do this class or we cancel your traineeship. Okay, I'll go do the class. That's the answer to that question, right? And I went off and I did this. I went and did this first class, and the class was clear thinking and argument. And I went, well, this makes complete sense. And then after a couple of weeks of this class, I was like, how come I wasn't taught this stuff at school? Like, Why do I have to be doing a Bachelor of Mathematics and have my employer insist on me doing this class before anybody teaches me how to do clear thinking in arguments, how to properly construct a preposition and argue my preposition? Why did I have to be like in second year university before I did this? Right? Which is a pretty obvious question. And if I'm in second year university before I do this, what's everybody else doing? So I was intrigued. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And the lecturer talked about the responses people have to presentation of arguments and how it's mostly emotional based on their already existing thoughts and positions, etc., etc. And one of the reasons why it's very hard to persuade somebody to your point of view is they're committed to their current points of view and they don't want to change their mind. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And shocker, right? Shocking. This is really interesting. So I signed up for some follow-on things which weren't mandatory. This particular one was mandatory; you had to do it. But I was so taken and so interested, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to do some more of this." Right? And also, they were, in terms of workload, they were cheap credit points. So that was also not lost on me, right? In terms of workload, they were cheap credit points which could be counted to my degree, and that was not lost on me. But I was also fascinated by it. So when I was in third year, I did a psychology class, the nature of being human. What's the psychology of people? And oh, wow, this was mind-blowing. That was mind blown at the end of this class, because we did all the classic experiments. We studied all the classic psychology experiments. Of course, what do you study in Psychology 101? You study all the classic psychology experiments and discuss them, right? Now, I'll mention some of them. The most famous one is the Calhoun Mouse Utopia experiment. Right? Now, if you want to find out what it is, just type Mouse Utopia into Google, hit go, you'll find a whole bunch of videos about the Mouse Utopia experiment. But fundamentally, the Mouse Utopia experiment says if you give mice unlimited food, unlimited water, and safety from any predators in a limited environment, the mice will procreate and breed to the limits of that environment, right? No, got plenty of food, plenty of water, they procreate and breed to the limits of that environment. And then a funny thing happens. You reach Mouse Utopia, and the mice start to degenerate in their behavior, and they start to die off. Now, the interesting thing is the mice don't die off back to a manageable population level. All the mice die off. They all die, right? None of the mice survive the Mouse Utopia experiment. So these enclosures go from 10 or 20 mice, the beginning set, to packed with mice, to the point of the mice are now crammed together, socially close, to they all die off. It doesn't come back to a reasonable level. All the mice die off. And the behaviors exhibited by the mice during the die-off are very fascinating behaviors. And of course, the Mouse Utopia experiment is translated to, if this is what happens in mice societies, what might happen in human societies, and what might we learn from the Mouse Utopia experiment that's applicable to humans. So it's a fascinating experiment. And in fact, we're seeing behaviors, the behavior of the mice in the Mouse Utopia, we're seeing those behaviors exhibited by people in densely populated areas today. Then there was the Milgram obedience study, which was like very interesting obedience study. The Milgram obedience study was a study into Nazi Germany and the behaviors exhibited in Nazi Germany, particularly in concentration camps and things like that, where people killed people just by being ordered to do so. And innocent people who didn't deserve to die. And the Milgram experiment was these behaviors occurred in Axis powers by normal people, and normal people let it happen. What's the psychology behind that? And are there any pointers to it? I mean, the German people are not in any way defective. So how did this happen? Why did this happen? And what is the propensity of people not brought up in that culture to do the same? Was the Milgram experiment. That was the question that Stanley Milgram was interested in. And it turns out that something like 70 to 80% of people will, under an experimental, what they believe to be an experimental situation, murder another person if they're told to do it by somebody they perceive as an authority figure. So the Milgram experiment was shocking. I mean, shocking. You're a Psychology 101 student, and you watch the Milgram experiment, and then you're going to discuss it. It's shocking. I remember seeing it, saying, no way this can be true. Like, literally, no way this can be true. This experiment they're doing. Like, I don't believe you. And they show videotape of how the experiment was done, and videotape of the people going through the experiment. And I was like, no way this could be. Like, literally, no way. I was shocked. And then we did the things like the Zimbardo Stanford University prison experiment. This is the Milgram experiment was seen as just, really, really shocking. And it was, very controversial, right? And Stanley Milgram was very negatively affected in his career with this, until Robert Zimbardo came along and did the Stanford University experiment and took some of the heat off Stanley Milgram, right? And the Stanford University experiment was a similar experiment to the Milgram experiment, except what they did, they had university students, as the name implies, and they were going to pay them for some time to do this experiment. And the experiment was a full-time experiment. It was planned to go over a couple of weeks, and Zimbardo had to pay them. And the experiment was to make some students prisoners and some students wardens in this makeshift, make-believe prison that they created at the university, and then see how reactions evolved, see how behaviors evolved. Well, the students, and these are just ordinary Stanford University students. This is nobody special, right? Well, ordinary Stanford University students turned into vicious wardens within a few days. Like, literally, it was within days. The reasonable behavior that one could expect from a warden was gone within days with these university students. And so Zimbardo had to call off, they were videotaping this and all the rest of it, because it's a psychology, human behavior experiment. And within a few days, they called this off. They were just like, what? No, this can't be happening, kind of thing. But Zimbardo, very bravely, in my opinion, published the video and published the results and said, this happened. Right? Now, it has been replicated by students who don't know the experiment. It has been replicated. Right? The other big experiment is the Asch conformity experiment. And this was like the first one we studied. And we actually did it on one of our classmates. And the experiment is, and you can go look it up, it's Asch, A-S-C-H, the Asch experiment. And I might even put links on the blog post to some of these videos, right? So the Asch experiment says you have a subject who doesn't know he's a subject, and you have other actors who know the experiment, what the experiment is, and the other actors, and the subject is asked to say which line is the same length as the other three lines, or which is the shortest line, or something else like that, out of three lines, right? And the actors are told to pick an incorrect answer, and the subject doesn't know that all the other actors are told to pick the incorrect answer. So the way that we were introduced to it was our lecturer just said, he went through, this is how we're going to set up. And there were students, there's always students late to a lecture at university, right? There's always some student who's late to a lecture. So the lecturer opened it up with, we're going to do this experiment, I need to get through this quickly, and we're going to do it on one of our students who comes late, right? And he explained the experiment. You are all going to pick this line, number one, in the order. We're going to pick this, then you're going to pick this, and then you're going to pick this. We can do this 3 or 4 times. And then after a while, the subject will agree with you on the wrong answer. And we all laughed and said, no way, like no way somebody's going to do this, right? And then some poor soul came into the lecture late, and the lecturer said, oh, you're late, we're going to do this experiment, and we want you to name which is the longest line, etc. So he proceeds to draw 3 lines on the board, and say to the guy who came in late, which is the shortest line? And the guy picks the shortest line, and he looks and goes, really? What? And he looks at the board. He says, everybody else, which is the shortest line? And we're all practiced and say the top one. And let's say it's the middle one that's shortest. We say the top one, and he's like looking at the guy, and the guy's looking around going, what? My whole class has said, like, there's like 50 people, I think, 50, 60 people in this class, right? My whole class has said the top one's longest, but the middle one's longest. And he's confused. And we did this 3 or 4 times. Sure enough, by the 3rd or 4th time, he's agreeing with the rest of the class about which one is the shortest. The lecturer's drawing 3 lines, and he's changing which one is the shortest, the top, middle, or bottom. And by 3 or 4 times, this guy is agreeing with the rest of the class when he's not going first. He went first the first 2 or 3 times, right? And got ridiculed and laughed at and all the rest of it for picking the wrong one. And then the lecturer switches it over, and the class picks the wrong line, the second longest line that's there. And after the 3rd or 4th time, the real subject of the exercise is picking the wrong line and agreeing with it. And I'm sitting there going, my God, people are that easy to manipulate? What's going on here, right? So if you study these experiments, we study these experiments, of course, in, as I said, Psychology 101. And then later on, in 1995, I did a class, a whole series of classes in the end, but I was fascinated with this question: why do people do what it is that they do, even when oftentimes what it is that they're doing is negative to their own self-interest. Sometimes people do things that even kill them. In particular, you're driving cars recklessly, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, things like that. People even times do things detrimental to their own well-being, even to the point of killing themselves sometimes, hopefully accidentally. But many people commit suicide as well. So I was fascinated with this question about why do people do what it is that they do. And I was fascinated in terms of, if I'm doing these things, how do I do better at what it is that I'm doing, right? So I wound up in this thing called the Landmark Forum. And I wound up in this thing called the Landmark Forum around relationships, because at the time I wound up in it, my relationship with my then wife was terrible, and I wanted to divorce her. And a buddy of mine seemed to have noticed something was up and invited me to this class. And in the Landmark Curriculum for Living, the whole series, what you do is you take a deep, deep, deep dive into the nature of being human. Okay, now in Psychology 101, And we did philosophy and metaphysics and things like this, looked into the nature of being human, the nature of belief systems, the nature of persuasion, and all these things we looked at university, right? But they really only scratched the surface. In landmark education, you take a very, very, very deep dive into understanding the true nature of being human. And the idea is with respect to yourself, such that you can figure out how to be more productive in your life, and you can figure out how to create a life that you love. And to be living life fully expressed, as we say, living life full out and be having fun, which is a lot better way than I was living life before I went along and did this, right? So landmark education was a transformational experience for me in understanding not only myself, but of course, if you understand yourself on a profound level, you come to understand other people on a profound level. So I'll talk about a couple of things out of landmark as well, right? And the first thing I'll mention, and I've mentioned on other audios, is a thing called already always listening. And that is, have you ever noticed that when you're talking to somebody, it always seems like they've got a conversation going on in the back of their head? Have you ever noticed that? And in reverse, have you ever noticed when somebody's talking to you, there's this conversation going in the back of your head that's all opinion and thoughts about what it is the other person is saying, right? Well, the landmark term for that is the already always listening. That when we're taking in information from other people, we are already always listening to that information through the filter of our own belief systems, our own culture, and all the things that we've come to believe are true by that point in time. We're listening through that filter. Okay? Similarly, other people are listening through that filter. And that filter is cultural for the most part. People have the belief systems they have based on the parents they were born to, which is in and of itself accidental. Not accidental that they were born, but accidental that they were born to those parents. So, for example, a child born into a Jewish family is likely to grow up Jewish. A child born into a Muslim family is likely to grow up Muslim. A child born into a Christian family is likely to grow up Christian. A child born into a Greek family is likely to have Greek traditions. A child born into a German family is likely to have German traditions. A child born into an Australian family is not likely to have any tradition at all except watching the cricket, right? You get my meaning. People born into different families in different religions and different cultures and different locations have vastly different views of the world. They're vastly different, right? And in many ways, people become a product of the family and society into which they were born, which is in and of itself a complete accident, right? So that constitutes this idea of already always listening. I'm already always listening to what it is that's being said through the filter of the family I was born into and the society that I was born into and grew up in and have the cultures of. That's already always there. And most of the time it's completely unobserved. It's completely not known by the person who's listening, right? And then there's the next bit of a thing that we call looking good. Okay? Losing face. Most people want to present outwardly to the public and even to family members the appearance of being tough, being in control, being, for women, beautiful and attractive, for men, stoic. People have an appearance they wish to present out into the world, right? An appearance which in their deepest, darkest moments just before they fall asleep on the pillow on their bed, they know is a sham. They know is an act. They know is a lie. But they will keep up the appearances. Okay? And keeping up appearances, make it till you fake it. Be successful out in the real world. Remembering that men who are willing to speak about their questions and concerns will immediately be castigated and attacked as weak. Right? Women will not be castigated. If a woman speaks in the open about being fearful, about being concerned, about being worried, she will be supported and she will be seen as needing support. Whereas if a man were to say exactly the same things as a woman says, he will be attacked, demonized, vilified, ridiculed as weak. So these looking goods are very different between the sexes. Okay? When was the last time you saw a man go to work in high heels, short skirt, push-up bra, full-on makeup put on with a trowel and a wig? Have you ever seen a man go to work looking like that? Apart from RuPaul, right? Let's rule out RuPaul for a minute. But apart from guys who are drag queens, men do not go to work in high heels, short dresses, full-on makeup, with wigs and push-up bras. We men do not wear that at work. But how often do you see women? How often do you see women wear makeup in the workplace? Versus how often do you see men wear makeup in the workplace? Well, the only men who wear makeup in the workplace are men who are going on television, right? Because the makeup is required to give them a normal look through the transmission mechanism. Okay? I remember the very first time I saw a friend of mine, Yuli Wiley, doing a class back in those days, this is the 90s, we at IBM had nationwide studios where a guy, the lecturer, would be in a studio in Sydney doing the video recording. It was all live, and we'd be spread around the country doing these classes. So we actually had these, the equivalent of Zoom. We had that in the 90s in IBM for our training programs. And I remember the first time I saw Yuli wearing makeup, and everybody just screamed with laughter when he came on. Everyone just screamed with laughter. And he asked, "What are you guys all laughing about?" And we say, "Oh, you look like a clown with your makeup on." And he says, "Yeah, they put this on to make me look normal." He says, "I don't like it, but apparently it's necessary." Right? So in the workplace, the only men who are wearing makeup are the guys who are on TV doing some kind of broadcasting. I mean, if I went to work wearing makeup, what would be the response? If I went to work wearing bright red lipstick, some rouge, some false eyelashes, some paint around my eyes, push-up bra, whatever, wig, what would be the response of my fellow men in the workplace? They would ridicule me, right? They would call me a homosexual. Mostly, they would ridicule me. I mean, even gay men don't wear makeup in the workplace. They're just immaculately presented. Okay? Versus a woman. How many women don't wear makeup in the workplace would be a better question to ask. Very, very few. Doctors, women doctors going to surgeries and things like that, where makeup is, it just doesn't work. You can't go into a 2-hour surgery wearing lipstick. No. Okay. But everywhere else, women are wearing makeup. Well, what's the makeup all about? And guys like Jordan Peterson have brought this up. Women wear makeup at work. Should they be allowed to do that? What's makeup all about? It's all about looking good. It's all about being appealing to the opposite sex. It's all about attention, right? But it's about looking good in order to get the attention of the opposite sex. That's what happens with makeup. So out there in the world, men are striving to look good. Women are striving to look good in different ways. But everyone's out there striving to look good, hoping not to be found out for who they really are. That's looking good. So I've covered a number of areas. I've covered a number of normal, natural, nature of being human behaviors. There is conformity, like the Ash conformity experiment. There is the already always listening of the cultural environment in which the person grew up in. There is the looking good. I've got to present myself out there as a high value person, being male or female, with having different values. We've talked about the mouse utopia experiment, where once overcrowded, the mice die off. And what's that about exactly? And we've talked about the obedience study, where people will be obedient to what they perceive as an authority figure. And we've talked about the Zimbardo prison experiment, where people will be domineering and controlling if they've given a position of authority. These are all normal, natural natures of being human. So what does this have to do with structured customer surveys? What does it have to do? Well, it's really interesting. In a structured customer survey, or any survey, but I'm talking about companies running customer surveys, the person you're surveying is subject to all these foibles, if you want to call them that, in terms of the nature of being human. They will be a conformist. They will bow to perceived authority. If they perceive themselves an authority, they will be tending to be domineering and controlling and abusive. Right? They will be surviving. They will be looking good. They will be trying to please. And they will do all this through their cultural background. And then you ask them a question, and you think they're going to give you a valuable answer. And the answer is no, they're not going to give you a valuable answer. Depending on that individual, the answers will vary, right? Depending on that individual who's answering the question, and depending on their perception of the individual asking the question. So for example, if you wanted to do some kind of customer survey, let's say you were running a hospital and you wanted to survey patients. If you put the person doing the customer survey, dress him up like a doctor and put a stethoscope round his neck so that he looks like a doctor, that person becomes an authority figure. Right? And the person who's doing the survey will be submissive, trying to please, and giving the answers that that person perceives are desired by the authority figure. Right? So negative experiences will be underreported, and positive experiences will be overreported if the person taking the survey perceives that the person doing this, the subject of the survey, perceives that the person giving the survey is or has some form of authority. Right? That skews the survey results. If the person taking the survey perceives the person doing the survey, performing the survey service, as lacking in authority, they are going to skew negative responses because I'm in charge around here and I can tell these people what I think. It's going to skew negative responses. Okay? Now, depending on what kind of people you hit, you're going to get a mix of all this stuff. And it's not going to average out. It's going to skew one way or the other all the time, right? People are either going to tell you what it is they believe you want to hear, or they're going to be more combative about what it is that they're presenting to you, merely depending on the perception of authority between the two, right? Then you add into that how the question is actually phrased. And there's all sorts of literature on phraseology of questions to elicit a positive response or a negative response. Okay? And this is tied up with looking good. Nobody wants to give a negative response where the giving of the negative response casts a negative shadow on that person's character. They'll never say that. So, you know, the one of the most asked questions is, do you support protecting women from domestic violence? I mean, the question, the issue of domestic violence in the Western world is always couched in, do you support protecting women from domestic violence? Well, nobody's going to say no to that. Right? Nobody's going to say no to that, because if you say no to that, well, you're a wife beater. You propose that it's okay for men to beat their wives. It's like the question, when did you stop beating your wife? And you know, it's that question is proposed on the presumption that you beat your wife. Okay? But if you change the question from, do you support protecting women from domestic violence, to which almost everybody will say yes to, and certainly nobody will in their own name publicly say no to, right? If you alter that question to, do you believe government should fund protection of domestic violence for men and for women equally? Do you think, you know, the question being, should we make money available to protect women from domestic violence? Everyone says yes. If the question is instead, should we make the money made available to protect people, both men and women, from domestic violence equal for both men and women, everyone will say no. Like everyone. Well, why did they say no to that question? It would seem like men and women should have equal investment in protection from domestic violence, shouldn't they? And of course the answer is no, men should not be protected from domestic violence. The answer is there should be no money spent on protecting men from domestic violence. That's the answer from everybody. Which is why there are no domestic violence shelters for men. Right? None. So the way in which the question is phrased and the cultural background in which the question is posed will influence the answer of the question as well. And the people constructing surveys, they know this. They know all this stuff. There's lots of books written about it. If anybody's making their living out of surveys, they know all this stuff. So what do? The people who actually construct the surveys, they know all this stuff. And so some company comes along and says, we want a survey to find something out. And the people creating the survey say, okay, well, we want more business from these people. So what we want to find out through the survey is what they want to hear. Right? We want the company hiring us to hear what it is that they want to hear. And they will construct the survey such that the survey will naturally give the company back what it is that they want to hear. So they'll buy more surveys from them. That's how this works. I mean, in the 90s, we didn't quite understand exactly why customer surveys were useless. IBM commissioned, in the early 90s, IBM commissioned all these customer surveys, and I participated in some of these. They turned out to be completely useless. I was kind of really interested in that, right? Well, now, nearly 30 years later, oh yeah, the people building surveys, they know this stuff. This information's well understood, widely available, right? So they construct a survey that will give the company asking for the survey the results that they want to hear, whether they're useful, valuable, or not. In which case, oftentimes they're detrimental, because the survey merely provides a confirmation bias. Okay? Like I said, the people who are building these surveys understand all this stuff, the nature of being human, understand how to manipulate a survey to get the answers that it is that they want. They understand all that. And so if you as a company are commissioning a survey, they're going to give you the answers that they want. And if you as a layperson try and build a survey, a customer survey, well, you're going to fall into all these traps, and the answers are going to look, as Bill said, very flat. There's not going to be much differences in the answers. The answers are going to have an amazing level of consistency amongst them. Well, the reason that answers from customer surveys, even if you construct them yourself, where you're trying to understand the sentiment of the customer, are very flat and have an amazing level of consistency in them, is your audience, the people that you're asking the questions of, are going to react normally for human beings. Which is, the significant majority is going to react in a certain way. Which is why there's not that much difference in the surveys. Right? And it all comes down to the nature of being human. It's virtually impossible to survey a large population of people looking for sentiment rather than plain facts, looking for opinion rather than plain facts, without getting hugely consistent feedback from people based on the socialization of the family into which they were born. In particular, a very good example is in particular political affiliation and political associations. So, for example, if you ask the same question of people who are very left-leaning in their politics, you'll get the same answers. And if you ask the same question of people who are very right-leaning in their politics, you'll get very similar answers, despite the fact that people on the left and right of politics might give diametrically opposed answers. Depends who you're asking very much. So the social group, the social, political, and cultural background of the people that you're asking the question of will override what it is that they really would answer anyway on this question. And this happens also to a significant extent, even if the person is promised anonymity, because nobody believes it. So that's why this all happens. Okay, that's kind of the background of why all this happens. That's the psychology of it and the philosophy of it. And in landmark education, you go through all this stuff and you understand why people do the things they do, because you understand why you do the things you do. Now, I will just add at this point, for the vast majority of people, the behavior of people, oftentimes, the behavior of other people, oftentimes occurs as a mystery. Right? The behavior of other people oftentimes occurs as a mystery. Particularly between the sexes, you will find between the sexes that men will often describe women as a mystery wrapped in an enigma. Men will often describe women as incomprehensible. We don't understand why it is that they do the things that they do. Men will often describe women as that. And in fact, one of the landmark classes I did had a proposal that women, from the man's point of view, women were indeed a mystery wrapped in an enigma, and that it was not really possible for men to understand women, and therefore we should just accept it. That was actually a postulation in one landmark class I did. Women are a mystery wrapped in an enigma, impossible for men to understand. Therefore, our position in life is best just to accept what it is that they do, because women constantly behave in completely contradictory fashions, right? From the point of view of men looking at women, women consistently behave in entirely contradictory fashions. What are we to make of that, us men? Okay? And of course, women say, well, that's sexist, because every comment a man makes about a woman today is now sexist. It doesn't matter whether the comment's true or not, it's just sexist. That's the automatic response. Okay? Today, that's the automatic response. And by the way, it has been the automatic response for the last 50 years. Any observation by a man about a woman or number of women is automatically deemed sexist, which of course is nonsense, right? Men today, and it's been 50 years, it is not socially acceptable for a man to express an opinion about a individual woman or a group of women. It's no longer socially acceptable, but we do know that it's enormously socially acceptable for women to express opinions about men. Like, there's a tsunami of those, right? So when you go out and you're trying to interview people and trying to get some kind of customer feedback on sentiment, not just facts, about your product or service or company or brand name, etc., you're doing it into all this nature of being human, and your chances of finding out anything useful from all that are approximately zero. Approximately zero. It's worse, people will tell the surveyor what it is they think they want to hear. The survey company will build the survey to do confirmation bias for the company engaging them so that they get more business, and what you get back may be outright detrimental. Maybe outright detrimental, which is exactly what happened to IBM in 1992. Exactly what happened. In 1990 and 1991, IBM was having real difficulties, and they commissioned all these customer surveys. And the customer surveys came back with very, very, very high levels of customer satisfaction. And IBM, in its wisdom in those days, believed customer satisfaction was highly linked to propensity for new purchases, for upgrades and new purchases, right? And so the thing that IBM focused on all through the 80s and then through into the 90s was customer satisfaction. And these surveys that which were done in IBM, and I was involved in my little SE way, these surveys were commissioned to discern levels of customer satisfaction from IBM customers on the presumption that high levels of customer satisfaction would lead to continued significant purchases, upgrades, renewals, etc. Okay? And then 1993 happened. Like, we were doing these surveys in 91, 92, etc. Oh yeah, then 1993 happened in IBM. Oh, it was a complete disaster. Okay? 1993 was just a complete disaster. IBM's revenue crashed. Just crashed. We had really happy customers, and they told us how happy they were. They just didn't buy anything. It crashed. Just crashed. And many, I was, of course, 1993, I was a 29-year-old systems engineer. I was not involved in the decision-making process or things like that, but it just crashed. And the senior IBM managers were surprised. They were actually surprised that the orders the revenue that was expected was not even close. Like literally not even close. I think that year in IBM Australia, we were like 30 or 40% under quota. It was not we missed by 4 or 5%. It was we missed by 30 or 40%. It was a disaster. And at the end of 1993, IBM then had to have its mandatory layoffs. But our customer surveys told us our customers were very happy. And that really was my first time I went, if IBM can mess this up, what else is going on out there, right? That was my first thought about that. And of course the customer survey bit was just one bit of many complicated things which were happening at IBM at the time. But the customer surveys all pointed to things are going to get better, and it was a complete, the customer surveys in 91 and 92 all pointed to things will get better in 1993, and things just got a lot worse. So customer surveys, because of all this, will produce biased results, right? So having said all that, 60 minutes or 56 minutes of saying all that, obviously the question is, well, what should we ask people which won't suffer from this bias? Okay, and there was a guy, and I think it's like 15 or 20 years ago, I can't remember his name, I can't remember the name of the book, but he looked into all this and wrote a book about it, and came out with the idea that there is just one question that you could ask to get a very good indicator of the quality of your product and whether you're going to sell more stuff or not sell more stuff in terms of this product. Just one question. Now the interesting thing is he wrote like a 250, 300 page book. I can't remember exactly how long it was. Please remember, this is like 12 or 15 years ago I read this book, and I've read a lot of books since then. Okay, so I'm 56, age is catching up to me. I can't remember the name of the author, exact stuff, but I remember the conclusion. And the conclusion he came up to is there is really only one question you should ask. And if you look around now, you will see this question being asked by the big companies. They've picked up on this. They've cottoned onto this, right? So in terms of customer feedback, when you're asking a customer a direct question, like on a website, this guy wrote this 250, 300 page book going through why surveys don't work, right? All the why it doesn't work stuff, because he had to have a decent number of pages in the book to get to his conclusion, and he had to have a reason for getting to his conclusion. So all the stuff that I've just talked about, he talked about in his book, right? All the biases. And his idea was he'd come up with just one single question, which is the question that companies should ask in interactions with their customers, right? And the big companies have picked up on it. You'll see it everywhere now if you look for it. And that question is, how likely are you to recommend this product to either other people or your family and friends or your co-workers, whatever the segment is that this product sells to? Okay, so if you're buying some songs off Spotify or whatever, the question is, how likely are you to recommend this song to your family and friends, right? But if you're buying a laptop off Amazon, the question will be, how likely are you to recommend this laptop to your co-workers? That sort of thing. But the fundamental question this guy, and I can't remember his name, postulated was, how likely are you to recommend this product or service, whatever it is that you've just bought or signed up for or commenting on or whatever, to your family, friends, co-workers, etc. The people that you know. How likely are you to recommend this product to them? 1 to 10. 1 meaning, get out of town, this is a piece of junk, to 10 meaning, I love it and I'm telling everybody about it. And 5 being, no, I'm not going to do that. right? 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend this product or service to your, say, family or friends, co-workers, etc.? That one works. That question works. And so companies are now asking that question, and where they're getting low responses, they're working to adjust their product, and when they're getting high responses, they're working more to better their product to get higher responses. But that's the question that they're asking. Now, why does that question work as opposed to any other question? Well, you're not asking for any interaction with any customer survey rep or anything else like that. You're not giving the opportunity for all those biases to come into play. You're simply asking the question, this product or service that you've got, we know you've got it. The person being surveyed knows that you know you've got it. How likely are you to recommend it? And the higher it is on the likelihood to be recommended, that's actually the better the product or service. And the lower it is, the worse the product or service. And so the alteration is, let's alter the product to get better, let's try different versions and alter the product to get better responses in that one and only question. And that's what we're seeing today, right? So that's the question to ask, and that question works well. Now the thing about Bill Inman's textual analytics is the idea that comments made through emails, through forms on websites, through calls to customer reps, etc., perhaps those comments are more meaningful in how it is that we might adjust our product or service than structured customer surveys. As Bill has noted, and he's now the expert in this area, going out with a customer survey produces very flat data with little variance, which is very suspect in and of itself, versus comments on websites and feedback and things like that and emails being fed in provide a very rich, diverse source of comments and sentiment, and perhaps that's more useful overall to improve the product or service that's being presented to the consumer, right? And I would believe, given my knowledge and experience, I would believe Bill is really onto something, which is why am I doing his class and why am I learning his software? I think he's really onto something. Hearing the voice of the customer in a way that's not biased by the customer's prejudices, not bad prejudices, just prejudices meaning they have prejudices. I believe that could be very, very, very valuable to companies in terms of improving their product and service, telling you what to improve exactly. Because if you go to a restaurant chain, let's say McDonald's, let's call it McDonald's, not actually McDonald's because McDonald's is kind of a different animal. But let's say you have a restaurant chain, let's call it McDonald's, but it is actually something else. If you simply ask the question, how likely are you to recommend our restaurant to your relatives, friends and family, you'll get an answer. But it won't, and it will tell you, yeah, we're moving in the right direction or not moving in the right direction. But a restaurant, the experience of going to a restaurant is such a complicated experience, that question's not telling you what to change. It's just telling you if you're headed generally in the right direction. But if you're selling a widget, a particular model of cell phone, for example, a particular model of laptop, a particular song, there's a lot of things which are sold by individual model units, such that if you ask the question, how likely are you to recommend this model unit to family, friends, co-workers, etc., that question tells you a lot about how it is that you can improve that model, right? And it tells you if you're headed in the wrong direction or the right direction. But the question of how likely are you to recommend our restaurant? Well, that doesn't tell you what to change, right? So my view of this textual analytics is that if it can tell us, give us more of an insight on what it is that we could or should change within, say, our restaurants to improve the experience by the customer at reasonable and fair margins, then that's an entirely different thing to just asking that one question. Okay? That's why I'm doing the class. But there is a book out there. I'd have to try searching for it again. I couldn't find it. But there is a book out there which was the original work on just how likely are you to recommend this product to co-workers, family and friends, etc. And that question, if you start looking on websites, you'll see it's there. You'll see it's there. Okay? Not everywhere, but you'll see it's there. On Amazon, they just rate things 1 to 5, and they get a lot of phony ratings, right? But that range question is there. Okay, so hour and 5 minutes. It's a kind of long dissertation on why structured customer surveys are useless, because I went into a little bit about the psychology and nature of being human. But all those things add up. The psychology and the nature of being human and the bias of the survey writers, etc., all those things add up to mean customer surveys are in general useless and at worst dangerous. Okay? Occasionally you might get good ones that are useful, but they're certainly the minority. And where we have come to and been well studied and well understood is just asking about the reference question. How likely are you to recommend this to family and friends? Okay? So a long dissertation on all that, but I hope this audio is for this individual in the class, and I'm going to give her a copy, and then we're going to have a conversation about it if she's got any questions. And it's just out there on my website as something interesting for you to listen to. If you found it interesting, great. You might want to put a comment below. If you have any questions, put the question below on the page, wherever you happen to see it. And of course, if you want to recommend this audio to one of your business colleagues about why structured customer surveys are useless, by all means, pass it along to your business colleague. Okay? So with that, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you listening to my audios. Thank you very much, and bye for now.